We're streaming. You're good.
All right, guys, welcome. How's everybody doing tonight? Guys, welcome to the Tightline Live. I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky, guys. Welcome to the show. This entire show is dedicated to you, the angler. Our goal is to bring you education, information, cutting-edge techniques that are going to help you become a better fisherman and hopefully catch more and bigger fish every time you're out there on the water. Guys, this entire live feed is brought to you by Bass Pro Shop. So a huge thanks to Bass Pro for providing this platform to let us go live right to your screen and, again, get your questions answered. The entire concept of this is to engage with you. So right now, you have questions, comment, bring your friends in this thing. We always say this. We all have that fishing buddy, right, who maybe isn't quite up to par, and sometimes it's hard to fish with that person because of their angling skills. So bring that guy in here. That way you don't have to be the bad guy telling him he's bad at fishing. Let him answer us questions. We'll get him answered. We'll get him dialed in. We'll have him start catching more fish. So again, either way, guys, huge thanks to Bass Pro Shops for being our partner in this. You're watching this on the Bass Pro National feed, as well as Bass Pro regionally here in Denver, as well as Tightline Outdoors. So again, huge thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Guys, it's a special show tonight. We got some great friends in studio with us as we talk about tonight's topic. We're going to start off talking about big northern pike. Guys, whether you fish northern pike in Canada or the Midwest or out west, I mean, they're in a ton of different states. And guys, the pike population is growing. And I'll tell you what, there is some monster fish in the lower 48. And we talk about this a lot. A lot of times the western states, certain lakes in the Midwest, even have larger fish than a lot of times the notorious Canada trip. So we're going to talk about all that, guys. Real quick, I want to introduce my guests. We're joining the studio here with Will Dykstra, Senior Predator Guide here at Tightline Outdoors, and our good friend Jake Hammer, guys, from Utah. Guys, when it comes to big fish, these guys are on top of it. And, you know, we talk about big pike like we're going to talk tonight, but, you know, I met Will and hired him at Tightline actually when he was full-blown musky. He was all musky. And to date in Tightline Outdoors history, he also holds the biggest walleye. So he, multi-species of everything.
Right, absolutely.
Now, Jake over here, same exact thing. Whether it's big pike, big tiger muskie, big walleyes, this guy is on top of it. Now, you reside in Utah and fishing literally all the premium waters there, but every time I look at you, you're somewhere else. You're on Lake Erie, you're in, you know, the Oregon coast, whatever. I mean, look at the fish right there. Look at these walleye that you're catching. Now, one of those walleyes was just recently, in the last couple weeks, I mean, you catch some predators. If it has teeth, you're after it.
That's right. If it's big and it swims, we're chasing it.
That's awesome.
Like it.
So, guys, with that being said, you have got three voices here on camera that all love chasing predators and big fish. Again, the main topic for tonight is talking about northern pike. But with that said, you have questions about big lake trout. I mean, Jake's an expert on the Flaming Gorge and all kinds of lake trout fisheries. Will and I both fish lake trout fisheries here in Colorado. I mean, you know, Will was a major part and, you know, the key player in developing the topwater for lake trout technique. So, guys, we have a lot of knowledge here. Again, whether it's walleye, pike, lakers, all these that swim together, muskies, guys, we got answers for you. So, again, that's the topic for tonight. So, again, get comfortable. Bring all your friends in this conversation. Again, we also want to see your comments. You have questions about anything we're talking about tonight, guys, bring your comments now. We'll answer them right now, and there's no excuses to not have that education. So, again, bring it on in here. But as we start off talking about big northern pike, this is that time of year that's crucial. And I think, you know, across the board, you get ice-offs at different time, and you get certain bites. And everybody associates their bite to when the ice comes off. And they don't necessarily think about what's actually happening under the ice. So, like, you're looking here in Colorado, right? So we reside here in Colorado. We do a lot of pike fishing here in Colorado. And our pike are spawning right at that full moon in April. That's their key time to spawn. And they do that regardless of conditions. So whether there's 2 feet of ice over their head or wide open water, they're spawning in those conditions. And it's fairly similar everywhere across the country. You know, we talk about the Canada thing, because again, it always comes up. Everybody's fished northern pike in Canada. And as you talk about that, everybody's like, oh man, we always go up there and ice off. You know, that ice off is the last week of May, first week of June, and these guys are on fish, and everybody's like, oh yeah, you know, we hit them, you know, when they're spawning. And I'm like, they're spawning in June? You know, how do they get prepared for the upcoming winter and things like that? When in reality, most likely these fish are well post-spawn, and these fish are actually starting to sun and come back in shallow as that water warms by the time anglers get after them. But either way, depending on where you are, everybody has different conditions. So we wanted to talk about that because right now, more than likely, wherever you are, you're probably dealing with the early stages of pre-spawn for pike. And that literally leads to some of the biggest fish of the year. So, Devin, can you actually throw to this picture of Will with the pre-spawn fish from last year? we love talking about that because I talk to so many anglers that talk about having to go to Alaska or Canada for giant pike. I mean, that pike right there is in the mid 30-pound range.
Absolutely.
I mean, had you decided to kill that fish, that blows the doors off the Colorado state record and more than likely a lot of the Western state records. I mean,
Absolutely.
giant fish. So either way, these fish exist probably in the waters near you. So if you're in a situation where you have ice, you know, guys are sitting in shallow water, and this is that peak time. Everybody's like, man, that late ice is hot. These fish are gorging on, you know, dead food, and they're just eating, you know, a ton, building up that weight for the upcoming spawn. And the same thing happens. So whether you're open water or ice, it's all the same conditions. I think everybody gets hung up on the surface, if it's ice or water, you know, ice out, all those terms. But the fish are doing the same thing regardless. So it's up to you, the angler, to really fine-tune it. And the first thing I want to talk about and get your guys' opinion on this is catering to the fish. So as a Western angler for pike, we probably deal with some of the toughest conditions around. And again, I'm not trying to make people feel sorry for us,
Right.
but it is what it is. So we go to these smaller impoundments. You know, so some of the waters that we're fishing pike in are, you know, 1,400 surface acres, 2,000 surface acres, and that's a big body of water. 2,500 surface acres. I mean, they're ponds compared to where other people are fishing pike. And a small reservoir that's like 2,400 surface acres might get 80,000 catchable rainbows in a stocking period in the spring. So these fish are gorged. So you don't have the rip roar attitude that you might have in the Midwest. You know, people talk about these pike, you know, oh, let's do a figure eight for a pike and these follow-ups and these like explosions. I'm not saying our fish don't hit hard, but our pike literally have a rainbow or a sucker swim this close to them. And they're like, I'll wait till something else gets closer. And it's just what it is. We have so much food that our fish tend to get lazy. And so we've developed skills, all of us, even our lake trout, you're the same way with just giant fat fish and lazy fish, that we've developed skills to cater to the fish. Everything we do is literally like, you're almost begging the fish. You know, we slow things down. We work on our zone. You know, never do we ever ask a fish to swim, you know, a foot in the water column to hit a bait. We put our baits literally on their nose, and we ask them politely to take the bait. And that's what leads to the success of a lot of these big fish. So you talk to an ice angler. This is the last thing I want to say here. You talk to an extremely avid ice angler that catches giant pike in pre-spawn. What do? They drop a big sucker, and they let it sit. And the pike comes up and looks at it for like 25 minutes. And he finally is like, all right, I'll take it. And he sucks it in. But now all of a sudden, it's open water, and we cast out these swim baits, and we cast out these baits, and we go to town jerking them and working them, and we expect the pike to tear it up. And they don't, because they're low on energy. Again, they're pre-spawn, they're huge, they're hungry, but it's all about catering to those fish. And that's the first thing that we're going to talk to, especially with you guys, is how we've developed skills to cater to big fish, pike especially, but I mean tigers and lake trout and all that. The finer details, I think, catch more big fish than anything else. So we talk about that a lot on this show, but, you know, line and leader, especially when we're talking about these big predators, you know, it's great. We're both friends with Pete Mana, you know, and, you know, phenomenal big, you know, tooth angler. And we talked to him about lines and leaders, and it's so different out west. We talked to all these guys. You know, we had the Next Bite here, you know, not too long ago. We were talking to them guys about musky fishing and just the difference of a normal food source lake and then a situation where you have to spoon feed them in a really catered to lake, to where you're downsizing leaders, you know, no option to steal leaders. You're working your baits. We're using line counters on everything. We're just trying to cater to the fish. So that's the topic. So, well, number one, as you approach a springtime fish, what's your goals? How do you approach it, and how do you cater to the fish? What do you do different than, you know, you fish Lake of the Woods, you know, right. Midwest guy. What do you do different here in Colorado?
You know, I'd say, you know, first of all, when you and I first met, you know, you said I was full-blown musky, yep. And I was always of the mindset, if the fish aren't biting, I'm going to make them bite. You know, and I remember the first time we went out fishing together, yep. And I was burning a topwater bait, and you were like, they're not going to eat that. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like, what do you know? I fish Canada. But the reality of it is, you know, like Nate said, is we have fish that are probably overfed. And the unique part about our fisheries, a lot of these reservoirs, is the fact that these fish are the apex predator in the reservoir. You know, not like a big laker. I mean, not many of our lakes, not many of our pike lakes out west here have a predator that's larger than them.
No, absolutely. They're the king of the lake.
There's a couple lakes that have lakers and pike in them.
Yeah.
You know, but these fish don't have that sense of urgency to feed
100%.
to where, like, you know, that swim bait goes by them. They know if they don't eat it, somebody else is. You know, but
right,
here,
it's the truth.
The reality of it is if you're not catering to these fish, especially early in the season, you're not going to catch them. And we joke about it. line, we're basically using our exact same setups that we use for walleye, precision trolling for walleyes, to target these pike. And when I say the exact same setup, right down to the snap that we're using on our on the end of our line. No leader, 10-pound test monofilament, so we know exactly where our baits are going, and we're literally spoon feeding these fish. Because these fish, we always, Pete last year on the radio, Pete Mana said, sometimes the old girl doesn't want to get off the couch to get her cheeseburger, and somebody's got to bring it to her. And these pike are literally the exact same way.
Same way.
And so for me as an angler, when I break down how I start the season, and you and I both do this a lot, is we're looking, I always tell people, less action is going to get you more results early in the season. We're talking about cold water temps. I mean, sometimes barely peeking into the 40s.
Oh, definitely.
And these fish they're cold-blooded, they're lethargic. They're not necessarily, even though they're trying to pack on the pounds for the spawn, they're not necessarily rip-roaring feeding. So it's important to really cater to the fish. We talk about it huge. I mean, one of the biggest parts about it is just like walleye fishing or just like any other precision type of fishing, these fish literally, like, inches matter.
100%.
I mean, I remember one of the first times we trolled together, you said, set that line counter at 65 feet. And I set it at 67. I'm like, what the heck, man? I'm not catching fish. And because in my head, according to the dive chart, that's going to change the
close
bait.
Enough.
Right. It's going to change it, like, literally inches. But that fish knows that particular forage base is swimming at a certain depth, and they're not willing to work any harder than they have to for it.
Nope. 100%. And we take baits, like general stick baits, they dive a foot down for every 10 feet out type stuff, and you break down the water column in 3 to 6 inch increments, and you'll catch nothing. Essentially saying trolling 5 feet below the surface. You go to 5.5 feet, lots of fish. So
Absolutely.
it's one of those things. Jake, how do you cater to your big fish? I mean, what's topics? Again, cold water, and, all big fish species. I mean, you're the master of big fish. Obviously, you spoon feed them, you cater to them.
Well, master of big fish is a stretch, but as you guys already hit on, our western waters, we are full of planer bows.
Yep.
I mean, our states love bows. I'm in Utah now. You guys are here in Colorado. And they chock our lakes full, whether it be one of our walleye lakes. Our musky lakes don't have much for bows anymore. They have a few trout. They're brown and they're getting bigger. But we are just chock full of bows. Same with our lakers and our walleye. So a lot of times we try to match the hatch. You get those baits that are similar. They like to stock in the spring and the fall. So you'll have fish kind of in a few different ranges of size. So early in the year, as you already mentioned, I'm going slow. I'm working baits extremely slow. If I'm working a pre-spawn of really any species and I'm looking for big fish, I'm going with a bigger bait and I'm trying to make them mad.
Absolutely.
And as it moves into spawn, we're getting that here. You guys we're kind of in the same boat, where I am and where you are here. We're pre-spawn, we're spawn, and we're post-spawn, depending on what body of water you're on.
Absolutely.
We have so many elevations where we live at the mountains, so you can be anywhere in there. And just depending where I'm sitting in that stage, I'll start with big baits, then I'll go to reaction baits, I'll start snap jigging, and then I'll work my way into more of a subtle, smaller bait later in the season until we transition to that post-spawn.
Summer, right, yeah.
Right.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Now, with that being said, the two things I want to really touch base on, number one, is the input of us, the angler. So when we look at a bait, everybody wants action, right? It's the same thing. So we tie on a bait, we hook a snap on a bait. How many times do we set it in the water and we drag a bait and we look at it, right? And we've all said that same thing. Look at that action.
Absolutely.
We all say the same thing. I would eat that, right? Every fisherman in the world has said that. And you drag a bait in a true 38, 39 degree water temperature looking for pre-spawn fish. You don't want the bait to move. I mean, I use a lot of balsa baits, whether they're, of any size, 7 to 10 inches. And I literally want the bait looking like a plywood going through the water.
Absolutely.
I mean, to the point where if you got to shave, bills off or whatever, you want a bait that really doesn't do anything. Almost like a sunning pike.
Exactly.
And people look at it and they see the correct bait. And they never give it a try. They don't have confidence because they're like, man, thing doesn't look good, doesn't do anything.
Right.
When you want that, that's the key to have that success, to have hardly any action. So that's a huge player right there. And another thing I want to talk about with Jake being said is matching the hatch. So this is probably one of the biggest things that I'd say the average angler messes up on. So you across the board, but at the lakes we're fishing, and we're talking rainbows as a planter base, as a food source. The average rainbow that they're stocking in the spring is 10 to 12 inches. So if you're a northern pike, right, you're a lake trout, you're a big walleye, whatever food predator fish you are, you see the same thing every day. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, you see the same food source. It's the same as you. If you ate a cheeseburger or a ribeye steak for 3 meals a day, every single day. You know exactly what it is. So these fish are feeding on a 10 to 12 inch food source, and we go out with what we think is big. This is 8 inches. That's an 8-inch kicking minnow. So to us, we're like, look at the size of this bait, and we see it all the time. Will and I are out guiding, and we cast these out, and people, they take pictures. They think it's a joke. They're like, look at the size of this. When in reality, this is not even matching the hatch, let alone standing out on the good side and even being slightly larger. So again, there's a lot that goes into it. I think when looking for big fish, especially like these big pre-spawn pike, is understanding the food source in the fishery. We talk about this all the time, understanding the food source. But if they're feeding on a 10, 12-inch bait, if you're too far from that, it's not worth your energy. Give them the meal that they want. I think that's a major thing. So with that being said, having the confidence to fish those bigger baits, have the tackle to fish those bigger baits. Now, as I look through here, guys, we got a ton of questions. One of the biggest things I want to talk about here real quick, everybody's asking about leader. And this is something that I don't even like talking about, because the second we talk about it, we get everybody saying, I use leader and I work fine. But in reality, when we've done the test, fishing clear water, and on the waters at least that you and I guide on, the second we start adding any sort of leader material, whether that's a larger size mono or fluorocarbon or whatever, we dramatically see a decrease. When I'm trolling for my big fish, when I'm casting for big fish, most of it's done, especially in the spring, we're trolling like monofilament, like 10-pound mono. It doesn't matter if it's 10-pound or 30-pound. It's the concept here is how we fight the fish. When we hook a big fish, the biggest thing that we do is we get that hook set one time, and we really baby these fish. I mean, we make our customers, even ourselves, have that rod loaded, and we just sit there and reel. The biggest thing is these pike come up on a bait, they sideswipe it, and they crush it. 90% of the time, that line's on the outside of their mouth. As long as you reel that fish in, you never have problems, because the line's not in their mouth. The problem is everybody hooks it, and they get excited. They start pumping, and they go to that little... Everybody does that.
We call it wicked tuna.
Yeah, they do the wicked tuna. Everybody gets that double hook set. That's my favorite. Right. They got them once, and they're like, it's big, and they do that little second one to make sure. Oh, yeah. And all that pike feels is the bait going like this. And that pike's like, it's getting away. So then they want to choke up on it to just swallow it. And that's when you get bit off. So we really, set the hook, get it hooked, and just reel it in calmly. And we very rarely get bit off. I mean, one in every 25 or 30 big fish will bite you off. So it doesn't really happen. Just got to take it easy. Now, I will say when we do a lot of the leader stuff, I noticed last year, I studied it, we've both been watching it, but last year, especially in a casting bite, I was running a fluorocarbon, good clear fluorocarbon leader, and from 12-pound and under, I had great results. I was catching a lot of fish. The second I went to 15-pound fluoro, minute, I dramatically started seeing a loss in my, your big fish, your 40s, 42s, Absolutely. 44s. We started seeing it down. You throw 20-pound on there, and you're literally decreasing your bites maybe 50%.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. Then you see guys going out with the traditional 50-pound fluoro leaders,
right? And
you're literally, it just doesn't happen. And I'm not saying don't do it. And again, I know everybody's telling me, I'm sure I don't even want to look at this, but you'll see, questions. I use it and I catch fish, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of fish. When you not one fish that we caught and it's making a story of it. When you do the data of hundreds and hundreds of big fish, and you actually truly take the notes and actually truly do the data. On a situation with lots of food in clear water, they just see it. The fish, they don't have an urgency. We like you said earlier, we deal with say a Canadian fish. A Canadian pike has other muskies in the lake. It has largemouth bass, smallmouth bass. It has walleyes. There's lakers. There's so many predators that if they don't take the meal, somebody else will, and it builds this attitude that they have to eat. Our fish, if he doesn't take this rainbow trout, he can wait 8 seconds, and there's another one. So, again, but it's a good thing to do because, if you're listening from Wisconsin, wherever you're watching from, you take this type thing. If you do good now and you learn to cater to your fish, you will blow the doors off of your fishery. Because, again, it doesn't matter. People are like, oh, my fish aren't like that, so I don't have to listen. But catering to fish in all situations is one of those things that's going to increase your daily bites. And I don't care what species. The second you learn to develop the skill to make it easy on the fish to feed, you're going to catch more fish. So I think that's a major player talking about leader. But you talk about leader. Again, you're more than me. I guided muskies a little bit in Minnesota back in 2002. You live for muskies.
Right.
You still fish muskies. Absolutely. Tell me about leaders.
So for a lot of the guys across the Midwest and into Canada, I will say that the leader trend changes.
Yep.
Especially, I would not dream of casting a bucktail on Lake of the Woods with anything less than a 100-pound fluorocarbon leader. or even 100-pound or 150-pound fluorocarbon leader. I mean, the leader game, has definitely changed, I'd say, in the muskie world, probably in the last 10 years, to where it used to be a straight piano wire style leader to all of a sudden the titanium kind of fell off because you could never tell where it was weak, and all of a sudden it breaks. So now I'd say in the muskie world, anyhow, the fluorocarbon, probably 130 to 150 pound fluorocarbon leader in that in that like 12 to 13 or 12 to 15 inch range is what
people like that. We got a lot of thumbs up with that one.
Which is but for me personally, and the reason for that is kind of like what we talked about with how these fish are grabbing these baits. And I can't tell you. I mean, I've caught a lot of muskies, and Jake, you've caught a lot of big tiger muskies. And how many of those fish have actually had the bait that you're using all the way in their mouth to where?
Very rarely. I'm fishing them, in the fall. It's an early winter situation, and they're really lethargic, man. They don't suck those baits back very far at all.
When we're talking about throwing like a big double tent style bucktail or a big jerk bait, the biggest reason I like having a leader is because it's saving me from my line getting broken. It's not the actual fish biting it off. They're not bite offs necessarily that I'm trying to protect myself from. It's the fish twisting up and wrapping and all of a sudden you got a big treble hook around your line, and that fish turns one way and it's gone. So as far as the leader game goes, definitely it changes as the further north you go, and the fish are definitely less leader shy. But I would say that the trend has definitely gone towards fluorocarbon more than steel.
And I mean, for obvious reasons, I think it's easier to work with. There's a lot of things you can feel nicks, and it's just easier to work with. With that being said, we have a guy asking about why no leaders. He's actually the true stat. So last time I tested it, this was a long time ago. It was 2007. And some of the peak heydays, things like that. But running steel leader in a trolling situation where I had great control. The reason I was trolling, these fish were sitting in key strike zones. So you had to use a line counter reel, had to put baits in the exact strike zone for the fish to feed. With that being said, we were running swim baits. And as we're doing these swim baits, bites, fish were sitting like 7.5 feet below the surface. I ran steel on one side of my boat, and I ran, my normal 10-pound mono or 12-pound mono on the other side. And on big fish, we're saying 40 inches and larger, we were 17 to 1. This was 2007. The bite was extremely hot, but I was 17 fish to 1 on the steel. So 1 fish on steel, 17 on mono, which is dramatic. So we're asking about bite-offs and worried about losing stuff. On that particular trip, we never got bit off. Now, I'm not saying this is not going to happen, because you guys are going to go try it. I'm sure the first is going to bite you off just because I told you to do it, and I'm going to get in trouble. But I think, honestly, we're probably less than 1 in 20 biting us off on big fish.
Absolutely.
It's that terrible 28 to 32 incher that really bites you off the most.
Exactly.
Their aim's terrible. They hit the head. But either way, let's just say, just for pretend, let's say 50% bit you off, which that would never happen, but 50%. So on 17 to 1, even if you lost half, you're still 70% ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
So for us personally, we talk about this all the time. When we were talking actually to the guys at JT, talking about rods, Chris, it all starts with the bite in all fashions. So everybody thinks about the outcome, but you can't have an outcome without a bite. So the biggest thing we think about is I got to create my bite first. Before I can worry about getting bit off, before I can worry about needing a net, whatever the case may be, you have to get bit first. So by having that no leader or a light leader or catering the fish in that fashion, you're going to create the strikes. And then from that point on, you figure it out. So for like us, we figured out how to not wiggle the rod, just literally baby. Like, we sit there as guides and we're like looking up at the rod tip, and our customer's like, "What are you doing?" You're like, "Don't move that rod!" And like we yell at them. It's sad. People are like, "I didn't move it." I'm like, "I saw you move it.
You pumped the rod."
But it is what it is, because if we know if you baby it, you don't get bit off ever.
Absolutely.
So you think about that kind of stuff. We talked about the rods. Everybody's like, "Man, I'm fishing for a 40-pound lake trout. I got to have this heavy rod." I'm like, you got to get the bite before you can worry about landing the fish. Don't worry about landing the fish. Get a rod that you have the right action on your bait. If you can control your bait, you're going to get a bite. That's where it starts. So
technique-specific rods are 100% where it's at.
Oh, absolutely.
Use the rod for what you're pursuing, what action you're trying to get out of your bait.
Yep, and that's it. But again, creating the strike always comes first, and that's the truth of the matter. So before I got a ton of questions here, I'm going to look through them here in just a second. We talk about bank fishing. So as a bank fisherman, what are tactics they can use? So a situation, I don't have a boat for trolling. I'm going to go from the bank. Any tactics for them, especially pike. This time of year, we have a lot of shallow fish. And to be honest, like Jake said earlier, we have fish across the board. Not all lakes are equal. What you see in one lake 2 miles down the road, you might be different. So you might have early pre-spawn fish right now. You might have late pre-spawn fish. You could even have some spawning fish. So, I would say, through the ice, we literally catch fish in 6 inches of water on pre-spawn fish. Open water, generally speaking, I start to see them about 4 feet of water. Whatever the open water does to them pulls them down just a little bit. But the deeper water is absolutely key. So when I'm doing that type stuff, I'm all about the jerkbait, but big jerkbaits. I mean, Will and I both know I had to travel to Florida to buy this big, I don't even know, it doesn't have a name. It's like an 8-9 inch suspending jerkbait. It has no name on it. You buy it like a gas station.
It's like a bomber knockoff.
Yeah. But this bait just sits there. So when you're fishing that super cold water, it almost has the walleye technique of like the 10-second pause.
Absolutely.
And you whack fish. But guys, bank fishing. How do we catch big fish in the bank, especially big pike?
I'll stick with the big bait, slow presentation, but I'm going to throw in there, not only is bank fishing really good ice off, I would say I'd prefer it. First ice off, I haven't done it in years, but northern Wyoming, we used to go fish ice off, and it was incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
I would rather be on the bank. So don't be afraid because you're on the bank that you can't catch fish, because I honestly would prefer ice off. Those first couple weeks, you get those warm bays. They're going to be the first place to heat up, and that's where your pike are going to show up.
I mean, we've probably caught some of our biggest Lakers from the shore. In the
even when we're on the boat, I can't tell you how many times in the spring you're still casting the shore.
Right.
It's the same water,
Absolutely.
whatever angle. So I think slow working jerkbaits is a huge thing from the bank. But yeah, the biggest thing I'd say is just overall is baits that you can control. I think that's really what it is. So like from the shore, I hate a very heavy sinking bait for the fact that that strike zone might be 4 to 6 feet, and I hate to have to speed a bait up because I'm getting snagged, hitting bottom. The second I'm forced to, anytime that I have to use speed to control a bait, I'm losing control of the bait, and I'm not doing that. So whether it's a suspending jerkbait, even a floating bait, I'd rather use so I can a little bit have more control, especially in like a shoreline situation as I get shallower, as I get near the bank. So I think that's a huge factor right there, especially from like the shore type deal. So I definitely keep that in mind as a shore thing. Next thing I want to talk about here real quick before I kind of go through some of these questions is a transition of style of baits. And this is something that, again, the small details. Now, we have all different walks of life. These guys were both making fun of me a minute ago because I didn't know what the name of a bait was. I am as old school of angler. I might as well be the grandpa of the group. Most presentations probably have to be out for 5 years before I start using them. It's just one of those things. I like old techniques. I'm all about the old paint job. I just like old stuff. I very rarely ever catch on to a new trend. I mean, Devin and Will have to be flat out kicking my butt for weeks on end before I'll go buy a new bait that's, brand new to the market. Just who I am. And I catch plenty of fish, so I mean, there's nothing wrong. But with that being said, you get all these trends, and you guys tend to stay on top of, the newer trends, maybe some new diverse techniques. But all baits tend to have a style, and I think so many of us overlook things, like things that we can't understand, some things that we can't explain. So talk about early pike. It never seems to fail that from March until May, we get a 20-degree swing in temperature, and our fish are all about that hard stick bait. They love, whether it's wood, whether it's acrylic, they like that minnow-style swimming bait, and it works great. You throw the best swim bait out there in the world, we catch fish on it, but it doesn't usually quite compare to the stick bait. Then all of a sudden you have fall, same temperature, same stocking program, nothing's changed, and they don't want to touch the stick bait, and they're all about a swim bait, hard or soft bottom. Right. So it's a stick bait all spring, it's a swim bait in the fall, and I mean obviously there's different actions, and they obviously don't like it or like it because of that action, but in reality, if you look at the true food source, you look at the match and the hatch and all that, not a lot explains it. And I think that's one of those big things that a lot of anglers have to think about. You have to get in or out of your head to try new things, especially when you deal with big fish, like these big pike and big lakers and big tiger muskie. They all have just a little bit of a cork to them. And you got to find that little niche that falls in there. We talked about this not too long ago. It's probably been a month ago. But with the opportunity of swim baits, and I want to hear your take on this. I personally love soft swim baits, and other people love hard swim baits, and everybody's got a different take. And I mean, we see it lake to lake. We literally have a situation where Will and I guide here in Colorado. The lakes are 3 miles apart, Spinney and 11 Mile. Spinney, they do not like hard swim baits for me, my style. You go to 11 Mile, and they do not like soft swim baits. I mean, 3 miles apart, and it's a 90% take on the two baits. I mean, you look at them from 5 feet away, you can't tell the difference. One's plastics, one acrylic. But that type of stuff all matters. So talk about the small details and little quirks that you guys have seen.
So for me personally, like you said, it's all about matching the hatch. And early in the season, this stick bait, for example, this floating Rapala that's just a balsa bait, low action. That bait, the biggest key is the fact that the profile of that bait. And early in the season for me, when I'm looking at these pike lakes anyhow, or these pike get really aggressive towards each other. And this, this profile of this bait right here looks just like a little pike.
Yep.
I mean, it really does. And then when you talked about you want that bait literally working through the water, no action at all. And it's basically, and I attest that to the fact that these fish are kind of aggressive towards each other. These pike are, and they're keyed in on something. Especially I'd say half of these fish we catch might not actually be feeding, and it's an aggression strike that they're getting because they're just coming off the spawn. They're still used to being aggressive towards each other. We use that pike pattern for that reason. I mean, and this one you're probably gonna roll your eyes at this. So this here it's a big pike profile. Swim bait.
It's new.
This is about 5 years now.
Oh, so I can almost use it this year. Almost.
So, but it's a big bait, big ribbon tail, got lots of action, and I talked about it earlier. I hate baits with a lot of action early in the season, and this is something that I do that a lot of people cringe at when they think about spending this kind of money on a bait. I'm actually going to trim this bait halfway up that tail, cut it with a pair of scissors or a knife or whatever, and now this bait has that same profile. A little bit more of that lifelike look to it, especially on these high-pressure lakes, and they're keying in on that. But I'm not afraid of changing these baits or trimming. I mean, we modify our lures
all the time,
probably during trips. And for the first 2 hours of the day, one might work, and then the last 4 hours of the trip, something else might work. So for me personally, I hate saying this because but it's true. Is you got to let the fish kind of tell you what they're doing or what they want. But for the most part, I've noticed, and we talked about it, the lower action early in the season, the higher action later in the season. I think that's why we see what we see on our lakes with the soft plastic versus the hard. So
definitely, absolutely. Any quirks?
I'm gonna jump on board with you on the hard bait versus soft bait. I'm gonna go soft bait 99% of the time. Okay. One, hard baits are expensive. If you're gonna get into the nice hard baits,
that's true.
You don't have to spend a lot of money to catch fish. And if I can produce off a soft bait, spend half the money, it's gonna get tore up over time. But those hard baits wear out too. As this bait runs through the water. Well, that's not hard bait. Sorry, I thought this was hard bait. But as the hard baits run, you're going to start getting scarred up, and they're going to start to show you. You cast that bait a lot, and it's going to get tore up. I feel like these rubbers go a little bit longer, and I like the action on them. I produce a lot better off soft baits than hard baits.
Absolutely. With that being said, half the time you get a bait torn up. I mean, a soft bait, we've all seen it at walleye fishing. That's the number one example. The more they get chewed up, the better they keep producing. The more chewed up, the more nicks. The rubber just keeps getting softer and softer, and those things wiggle around like crazy. And, a lot of times that can help. I got a question as far as, got two here real quick. So, what speed do we troll at? Willie, what speed do you like to troll at? And then, specific colors, and then we got some questions for Lakers here in 2 seconds for Jake.
Real quick, early in the season, we kind of talked about it earlier, we got cold water. These fish are going to be lethargic, and typically, when I'm fishing ice out pike or pre-spawn pike, I'm going to be going under 1 mile an hour. I mean, and again, we talk about it. This bait, when you're going 0.8 to 0.9 miles an hour. I mean, I've handed it to a customer, said, let that line out, and he's sitting there for 10 minutes like,
something's wrong.
Going like 2 feet. I'm like, well, you got to let the line out. But the reality is early in the season, just slow things down. And what that's going to do is a couple things, and you got to pay attention to this, is all of a sudden this bait isn't going to dive the normal depth that it would when you're running 1.5 to 2, or however fast we might be rolling. But early in the season, I start out at 0.7, 0.8. I'm working really slow, and I might kind of try to make up for that by letting out a little bit more line to get a little bit more depth out of it if I need to. But for the most part, I'm seeing that 0.7 to 1 early in the season. Then once the fish spawn and they're coming off the spawn, the water temp starts rising a little bit. I'll start getting into the 1.2 to 1.5. And I'd say by the end of our trolling season, which is typically the last week of May, I'm going to be in that 1.9 to 2.3, depending on what it is. And 2.3 is way faster than what we usually do. Yep. It's funny, we talked to a lot of musky guys, especially we got some guys in Utah, and they asked me, hey, how fast are you trolling for those pike? I'm like, I don't know, man, like 1.2 to 1.5 sometimes. They're like, I don't troll under 2.8.
3 or 4.
Or 3. But the reality is these fish need to be fed. Like spoon-fed.
Spoon-fed.
And if we were to be going, I mean, I'm not sure Yeah,
my kicker won't go that fast.
Right.
I got to use the 350. I'm going to be going 4 miles an hour. No, that's huge. I think the biggest thing is don't be scared of less speed. I think so many people go fast. I'm not saying it's bad, but generally speaking, that water's super cold, fish are lethargic. Don't ever be afraid to go slow. Or let's just say you don't have confidence going slow. Start throwing some big turns into your trolling pass. And if they start dumping that rod or dumping that planer board or whatever you're doing on the turns, that inside turn, that's a clear-cut sign to start, being or at least be attentive to that. But generally speaking, generally across the board, I don't think people go slow enough. I mean, there's certain times of year where I don't think they go fast enough, but in spring I don't think they go slow enough. So, all right, now we got jigging for Lakers. We're going to put this in your court there, Jake. Are we looking for structure or fishing mostly flats? What kind of structure do you find bigger lake trout associating with? Also, what type of action when using tubes, dragging, all that kind of stuff? Walk us through, dead sticking, subtle jigging.
So my Laker experience is virtually one lake. I'll be completely honest, the gorge. And the gorge is a different animal. You watch these videos, these guys up in Canada, or we'll put something closer to home for us, Pack, something like that, and they're fishing these fish aggressive. I know you guys fish them aggressive out here too as well. We just can't do that. It doesn't produce. You can get pups, and we can only think under 10 pounds pups. You can do that aggressive fishing and produce small fish. For these elite class fish, 25, 35, 45. We're almost always a really, really slow bait. We're talking 6-inch tubes, and we're fishing them, and you're dropping that bait to the bottom. We're doing a 3-inch lift, and we're holding it. And if you have a fish come in, you'll hop that bait, and then you'll just hold. The only time you want to touch bottom is when you're checking to make sure you're within that 3 inches. And as you guys know, these fish will come in, they'll hit it like a bluegill. And they just barely tap that rod, and if you're not ready for that, it's done. You missed. And when it comes to structure, right now is a really cool time on the gorge because we had a really weird winter. It was really mild, and those fish, they scattered. A lot of times they'll kind of group up, but they scattered. They were all over the lake. And when that happened, it made fishing difficult. So we froze for a little bit, then we went back to open water, and we kind of froze. We were all over the board. And about 3 weeks ago, they finally started to group up again, and that's what you want when you're jigging. Yeah. When we drop these tubes on these fish, they'll come in and we call them wolf packs. So you'll have 4, 5, 6 fish, and that's when you're going to get your bites because they start to compete. They'll start rolling and dropping and rolling, and then finally you'll get hit. So on top of that, where we're at in the water column, this early time of the year, we're talking right now for the next month and a half, we can get them shallow. On the gorge, shallow's 35 foot. I know you guys do some crazy stuff, 10, 15, 20. Well, there you go. There's a tube right there, about a 5-inch. And, we can fish them really shallow right now. As shallow as 35, all the way out to 110. I was out there 2 weeks ago, and we were getting bites out in 110. So you can fish the whole spectrum. But when you start the day, you can fish that shallow water. And they're going to be there. They're going to be actively feeding. They're going to be beating up these kokanee, these planer bows. And as the day progresses, moving out to that deeper water. And it's really day-to-day because you know how much the barometric pressure plays on Lakers. You can bang them up one day, show up the next day and not get a hit if you have that high pressure, clear skies. So, it's persistence, putting in that time to learn these fish. But definitely right now, I'd say starting shallow, working deeper, and fishing the big tubes. We have some different stuff we do later in the year, hopping and chase and different things. But right now is definitely a dead stick bite if you're headed to the gorge.
That's cool. And I think the dead stick bite is the one that a lot of people tend to overlook. I know Devin's got a question real quick. But with that being said, Cody, as far as the type structure, it's all about the food. Bring it right down to the food. So no matter where you're fishing, if you're on a lake that has kokanee, you're generally speaking going to be looking for deeper flats with access near a channel. Anywhere where those kokanee are going to brush next to, those lakes will sit on that structure and act as a funnel point for that. You're in a lake where they're feeding on rainbows, whether it's suspended rainbows or shoreline rainbows, your Lakers going to associate to that. You're in Midwest and they're feeding on smelt. They're going to be suspended on those deep smelt schools. So associate it to the food source that you're dealing with. And I think that's going to be a big factor at the type structure and the location of those big lake trout. And the biggest thing is, I think, trust your electronics. Don't, especially in a lake trout bite, don't waste your time. Don't fish if you're not seeing fish. And I mean, I can't tell you, I don't know about you, but if I'm jigging Lakers, if I drop a jig down and they swim away, I might give it another 10 seconds. But if there's not a fish on my screen, I am moving. I mean, very rarely do I ever just jig the bottom hoping they're going to show up. I mean, if they're not there, move and go find them.
And it changes minute to hour, day to day. You know what we do? We do 10 miles an hour in the boat. We go over the humps, and if you mark fish, it could be a hump you've caught 100 fish on. They might not be there. So you just keep rolling over these humps 10 miles an hour, and when you get a good school, you hit the spot lock and drop in and do that dead stick.
Absolutely.
What's your line set up when jigging these Lakers?
You're going to say something different than me.
You guys start, then I'll say.
So on the gorge, we fish 40-pound braid, and we go to a 25-pound leader. A lot of times, the rods we run.
I love it.
Yeah, but you're talking big fish.
No, I'm not arguing. Your fish You speak for yourself.
The rods that we're running a lot of times are a 50-inch heavy. So we like that shorter rod for better control on those big sweeps. We're doing this really subtle action. It gives you really good control. You're close to the boat, and those waves, you don't have 7 foot of rod out there. You're trying to keep that dead stick. On those 50-inch rods, and we can lay the wood to these fish. They have a really hard mouth.
I'm on board with that.
And we've all seen those rods just lay over the water. So we're running a shorter rod, 40-pound test, 20, 25-pound fluoro.
Perfect. For my rigs, normally same thing. I don't know about what rod manufacturers, but we take a normal walleye rod, a very high graphite, a great feeling rod. And we buy actually 6-foot walleye rods, and we take them right over the knee and we snap them off. So all our walleye rods are 48 to 52 inches. So all the lake trout stuff, we start off with a normal walleye spinning rod or casting rod, and we literally snap the tip off. I don't have one sitting here right in front of me, but we literally break them off to shorten it up, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, you got to have control of that jig. If those fish want a 3-inch lift, it is easier to do that 3-inch lift with that short rod. So you have control there. Two, in a situation of a lake trout taking this tube, right? The lake trout, whether you're hitting bottom or holding suspended, so many times these big, massive fish, they can't come in on bottom. Their front pec fins hit the ground, and they can't do it, so they invert, and they just suck that jig in. And the bite is so light that if you have a 7-foot rod, so yeah, you're taking this rod right here. We just figure out where that action's at. You chop it off like that has been. So you chop it off, and you just literally, you have a broomstick, and that's what you want. So
absolutely.
The situation of a normal, say, 7-foot rod, by the time you feel that bite, right, and you go to set the hook in even 35 feet of water, but generally speaking, 80 feet of water, 100 feet of water, by the time you swing, you literally got to lift that rod 3 feet before you actually connect with the power of the rod, the true bone of the rod, and actually bury that hook. On a fish that's 30, 40 pounds with a solid bone jaw, it just doesn't happen. You always get that little, you have them for a second, and then they're gone. And the second that fish rolls, you just don't penetrate. So you go with those shorter rods that are just so stout, and you literally move that rod 4 inches, and you are in the jaw on that fish's hook. Now, it's harder fighting the fish sometimes just because you don't have that big rod to fight them. But, again, all the rods that we're using, same thing, 48 to 52 inches. We're custom building them. We're just breaking the rod, cutting it off with a Dremel tool, putting a rod tip on it. But again, you're increasing your strikes, you're increasing your takes, you're increasing everything tenfold by having that great control. I'm using 14.6 fire line with a 12-pound fluoroliter, so dramatically lighter. We use that lighter line simply for the fact to hope to cut through the water column if we are strolling, dragging jigs, things like that. Hope to cut through the water column, just keep it a little shorter to hit that bottom there.
All right, we've got some guys on the Bass Pro page that have seen the In-Fisherman show about topwater Lakers. When do you target Lakers topwater?
Willie, go for it.
Well, so again, this is a food source thing, but definitely early in the year, I'd say
it's across the board,
right? It is across the board, but I'd say for the most part, when that water temp is cold and these fish are definitely still cruising shallow, the ice is just coming off these lakes. That's typically when we do this.
Yep.
Now we have caught them in the fall. Some nice fish in the fall while they're during the spawn or while they're staging to spawn. But again, that's an aggressive kind of thing.
Yep.
But I'd say for the most part, early in the season has been the definite tried and true. But with that said, it all depends on your forage and depends on the lake itself. I know and I know you're going to tell this story, but we catch, and I say you've caught fish into
middle of July, August, yeah.
and it's because they're chased, and those fish were feeding on suspended kokanees.
Yep.
So
I blew up a rod this summer on a massive fish, and
I was with him.
Yeah, Devin was with me, and so we're out here, and it was 120 feet of water. The lake was sitting between 80 and 90 down. The kokanee schools were at like 45 to 60, and I was throwing topwater. I said once you catch a lake trout on topwater, it's hard to go back to this. I can tell you that. So everybody else was jigging on the boat, catching fish, and I'm like, I'm sticking to topwater. And you can literally look on your side imaging on your Lowrance, and you can see these streaks coming. So it's nerve-wracking. Your topwater's out there 100 foot, and all of a sudden you see that side imaging just climbing. You're like, oh, geez. And these fish, they were literally coming up from 60, 80 feet down to hit topwater in July, August when your water's 70 degrees. So generally speaking, 6 weeks out of ice off, 2 months out of ice off is probably your premium. Anytime they're in less than 40 feet, that's a prime time to throw topwater for them. But with that said, I don't think there's any in game. We've caught them in July, we've caught them in August. As long as your fish are actively feeding and you're in water clear enough that they can see and somewhat feel that bait, I think they'll hit it. I don't think, a lake trout has a really diverse swim bladder. They can release that air as they're coming up. So as long as they can hear it or see it, I think you're going to catch fish. We will say, in the shallow water, having a little chop, make it to where they can't see the bait as good, definitely increases your take. The warmer the water gets, you start getting into June, July, August, and the fish are deeper, it's got to be a bathtub. Strictly for the fact they can't hear it. If you have chop in July or August when you're expecting the fish to come up 60, 70 feet, they just can't hear the bait, so your odds go way down. But on those first mornings when it's just a bathtub, they can hear that bait going good. And I think the coolest thing about this is, you gotta run a rough bait. We call it running them dirty. But you look at guys who, it was fun. We fished with Doug Stange, and he has the cleanest walk the dog bait ever. And we got out there, and I'm throwing the bait, and Doug's looking at me like I got something wrong with me. He's like, "That's how you do it." And he took a cast, and he's doing these really beautiful strokes. I'm like, "Doug, that's not gonna work."
Right.
Because what do you mean that's not gonna work? I'm like, "Man, you got to create a ruckus. Like you need to be a drowning duck."
Right.
And that's what it is. You'll be a puppy swimming for the first time. But the more action, noise, volume that you create on the surface, it drives them crazy, and it works. And again, if you haven't tried it, try it. Come out here to Colorado, we'll take you. But it's incredible.
And the last thing I want to say about this is something to think about. So when you're finding a fish, whether it's a laker, a pike, a muskie, and guys freak out about fishing deep water fish with topwater.
Yep.
And you think about it, how long does it take that muskie or that laker to go from the nose of your boat to the back of the boat when you're fighting it?
Yeah.
Seconds. Literally, like half a second to go, and that's a 21-foot boat. So you're talking 60, 70, 80 feet of water. It takes them literally
30 seconds.
We could almost count down in the summer when they were doing that.
Oh, yeah.
And, you see them on the side imaging, and it was literally like
just
3 to 5 seconds, and all of a sudden, it's right there. So don't be afraid of fishing deep water fish with topwater, whether it's a pike, a muskie, or a lake trout.
Yeah, they cover water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Hey, Will, let's go back to pike, and how do you use your electronics when the pike are shallow to find them?
I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. This is the one part of, the pike fishing that I'm doing is I very rarely, early in the season, we're talking about shallow water, I'm not really using my electronics. I'm kind of knowing that those fish are going to be in that area. If you get too close to them, a lot of times you blow them out of there. So for me personally, the only thing I'm really using my electronics for in shallow water is making sure that I'm, if I'm trolling, my speed is huge.
Yep.
And, and I will use side imaging to mark vegetation and that kind of thing. But for the most part, I'm not spending a ton of time using my electronics for that early season, pre-spawn bite in shallow water or post-spawn bite in shallow water.
I think the biggest thing that I use it for, too, is the situation of looking for weeds. I know that as I really get into right at that spawning time, so the very last stage of the pre-spawn, the very first stage of the post-spawn, is looking for the non-weeds. So I'm using my graph. I want it to be a desert. Whether I see a big pike or not, I'm not as worried about actually physically seeing the fish, but I want to make sure that I'm on that mud, sand, the thing that nobody wants. I don't want, if I have a lot of weeds, that's not the spawn site I'm looking for, so I'm avoiding that. So more than anything, I'm using sign engineering to look for that desert, to know that I'm on that premium site for those
Absolutely.
fish. All right, guys, we're going to take a couple more questions, guys. We've talked about 3-4 more minutes here. We got any more questions there, Devin?
A lot of guys want to see Will's son Ben on the show. They hear he's been catching some fish, and wish we had some pictures for him, but I think we pretty much covered it.
Perfect. All right, so I want to talk to Jake here real quick. 2 things. I want to talk to you about 2 questions. Number 1, I want to talk about the opportunity at jigging fish that normally aren't jiggable fish. So the situation of everybody's getting into trends. You can blame TV, blame magazines, whatever. Everybody follows outlets like this. Maybe some people are hating us for our trends that we start. But you talk about a big tiger musk. You talk about a big pike. Everybody throws big baits, swim baits, stick baits, all this kind of stuff. You're notorious for taking jigs, maybe for tiger musk. You're taking jigs to other fish. Talk about the vertical presence of a lot of fish, big walleyes. Everything that you do with a jig. How do you catch a lot of fish in different situations? How do you develop these patterns?
The bigger fish bite is just, trial and error. And something I've done this whole winter is upsize my baits. I'm taking baits to walleye that most people won't do 6, 7, 7.5 plus inches. Who does that?
No. Yeah, exactly.
Especially in cold water, we're talking mid-30s and 40s, and I'm just beating them over the head. I can mark them. I can see them down there. You just put those baits over their head and just keep thumping them over the head. And once we're going back to the technique-specific rods, I fish a little bit of a longer rod. I fish a JT 7.1, GTX 7.1, and that's a medium-light rod, but I can get all the fuel on it. I like that because I'm fishing a heavier head as well.
Yep.
I like that faster drop. You know, and everyone has their own take on things. In right situations, the lightest head possible is the best thing, right? You get that slow drop. This winter, I found for me, I was taking these baits and I was doing the fastest drop possible. I'd rip these baits up and let them fall with a 3/8 ounce head, 6-7 inch bait, and these fish were just inhaling. And I'm not saying these 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 12-pound fish, but all the way down to 18 inches. They were taking these 6-7 inch baits, and they were gone. There was a fish I stuck one day. He had an 8-inch shad in his mouth and took a 6-inch swim bait, a speed shad, Bass Pro speed shad. Took a 6-inch bait and had that, I think, 8-inch shad, and he was only 22 inches. I mean, so taking these fish and just force feeding them. That's what I'm doing differently, you know. And as long as I've been watching, you know, everyone else's shows, everyone says we need to go light as possible in cold water. Well, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you need to beat them over the head until force them to bite that bait. So.
Definitely. No, I love it. Absolutely. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, it's all about you, the viewer. Everything we do, hopefully, is helping you guys catch more fish. We try to get to as many questions as possible. But again, guys, it's all about you. So remember, always mark this down. Whether we're going live in studio, showing you clips, going live from the water. Guys, we're doing a lot of different stuff here on Tightline Live. So again, make sure you send the notification. Text the keywords in to make sure we can send you a notification if we need. We can text you when we go live. Guys, the biggest thing is just make sure that you follow this thing where it's all about you, bringing you that education. Bring everybody into this conversation. Share this post. Again, the more comments, the more information we'll cover, and hopefully you guys will learn more. Real quick, Jake, how do people get a hold of you? Let's just say we want to get more information. We follow you on Facebook. I know I keep trying to get you to do more on Facebook, but
Facebook,
everybody follows
Instagram,
you on the lake. But we got Jake Hammer. Make sure you follow him.
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, come visit me. You know, I fish a few tournaments locally in Utah. I'm working on starting something, maybe with Nate. Maybe we're going to start some tournaments in Utah and see where things go. You know, the walleye fishing is really starting to blow up in Utah, and hopefully we can promote that as a sport and get that going.
Absolutely. You're always hanging out at Fred's Marine. If you guys want to see him down there, make sure you go to Fred's Marine, guys. That's the nitro dealer right there. Jake's always there. You can always meet him there, talk to him, check out his boat, things like that. Willie Dykstra, you can always follow him on the Tightline Outdoors page, as well as his own personal page, Will Dykstra, guys. And I was your host, Nate Zelinsky. Guys, again, huge thanks for coming in, and a huge thanks to Bass Pro, guys. This entire platform is brought to you by Bass Pro. Again, the premium retailer. I promise you, if you're an angler, they have it at Bass Pro. They have all your needs covered. So again, huge thanks to Bass Pro for providing that platform, as well as letting us take over your Facebook page. So again, huge thanks to Bass Pro for letting us go live from their page. Also, huge thanks to Bass Pro Denver. Let us go their page. Again, all of our followers here at Tightline Outdoors. So again, guys, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. We will see you next week. Thanks for joining us.